Welcome to the Joseph Priestley Society Lecture Series at the Science History Institute. JPS is a volunteer-supported program, and you just heard us chatting among ourselves. That promotes a deeper understanding of science, technology, and industry with an emphasis on innovation and entrepreneurship. The topic we are focused on today is the relationship between the foods we eat and the nutrition we need. What is the science behind that? How does chemistry factor into the nutrition? Our moderator today is Dr. Keith Wing. Dr. Wing is a 13-year JPS member and former senior research associate in agriculture and renewable chemicals at Roman Haas and at DuPont. He is now a retired consultant. Keith, welcome and thank you for moderating.
Okay, thank you very much, Grace. I'm very, very pleased to present this very fine panel of experts on functional foods: Emily Levitt Ruppert, Sam Tharp, and Jesse Smith. We're going to start by talking about some aspects of human nutritional needs and how this is met in Afghanistan versus the USA and other countries in a cultural context with Emily Levitt Ruppert. Then later on, we're going to hear about how flavor chemistry is dealt with in the food industry with Sam Tharp. And finally, Jesse Smith will give a presentation on how we developed scientific knowledge around food and health, and how that supported something that everybody with families can relate to, the school lunch. And so with that, we're going to change over to I also have to add, for everybody, we're going to start with the panelist presentations, but please, for everybody in the audience, put your questions in the chat box at any time during the presentations. And if you want to direct a question to a particular presenter, please name them in the questions, and I'll collate all the questions and present them to the panel in the second half of the presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Emily Levitt Ruppert. She has a PhD in international nutrition and a master's in community nutrition from Cornell. Emily, please take over.
Thank you, Keith. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. A lot of my work has been in other parts of the world, but now that I'm US-based, it's been fun to apply what I've learned about looking at food systems and deficiency issues causing malnutrition in other countries, and how can we start to address issues in our country. Today, I'm focusing on working towards sustainability in global food systems overall, and we'll talk about emerging issues and opportunities both in Afghanistan and in the United States. So in the picture on this first slide, I have what it looks like when you eat at a family's house in Afghanistan. In the top right, that's a meal that I was served when I was a guest in a rural village. I was hosted by one of the village leaders, so it was a very generous spread. Outside of the photo is a plate of protein. So if we look at the myplate.gov schematic, which is USDA's current food guidance for school children and all of us, what we see is there's quite a lot in the grain category. There's a lot of fresh baked bread in Afghanistan, which is divine. There's also often a shared plate of rice. Sometimes there's carrot and raisins mixed in with that, and occasionally chunks of meat on top. And then on the side, they often have a plate of fruit and a plate of fresh green herbs. And here we have a little dish of tomatoes and onions and a hot pepper, and then a dish also of yogurt. So you see how they're addressing their different food groups in a different way than we do. They also do shared plate. Unless you're sick, you get your own plate. The picture below that is a festival celebration setup. So they put a tablecloth in the middle of the floor. People sit around it. And this time of year, it's Ramadan. People will visit each other in the evenings after sundown, or during their holiday times during the day when they have Eid. And they'll serve the best foods, the fresh fruit, dried fruit and nuts, and high rich nutrient dense food. So that's one of the things I discovered in my work, is that the day-to-day diet was less rich than the celebratory diet, which is consistent across cultures, but it was notably present there. So social networking turned out to be, literal social networking turned out to be one of the key factors for good nutrition in Afghanistan. At the end of the presentation, I'll touch on how my own family, where we have gluten, dairy, almond, and pineapple enzyme sensitivities, is trying to meet this food guidance that we have here from USDA and do the alternatives to dairy and typical wheat foods. Are they actually meeting our food requirements, and what can food scientists and chemists do to help us with that? Next. So the two questions that I'd like to toss out to the group today are, how can we use a multi-sectoral approach and lessons learned in Afghanistan to address nutrition gaps in the United States and the broader Western world? And secondly, how can scientists help fill the nutrition gaps created by food allergies and sensitivities so that people can access palatable and balanced diets? Currently, about 33 million people have at least one food allergy or sensitivity, which is about 10% of adults and 6 to 8% of children in the US. Next. The places where I worked in Afghanistan were Kabul for the policy-related work, where we looked at policies and programs to address identified population-level gaps in nutrition, and in the north, where it was safer to work because I'm not a danger-seeking person. And the Northern Alliance was the group that partnered with the International Security Force to push out the Taliban 1.0. And so that was an area there where they called it a green zone. And interestingly, it was also the breadbasket part of the country where they were rich in a lot of orchard fruits and nuts. So they grew a lot of grapes and apples, which are native to the Persian region, and pomegranates and almond trees, which look like cherry blossom trees, which is timely for us in DC this time of year. Next. So in Afghanistan, there is endemic malnutrition. The leading issue that people do focus on in my field is stunting, which is the child in the middle of this picture is a healthy 7-year-old, and the child on the left is a stunted 7-year-old who's the same height as a healthy 4-year-old. Now, I say healthy because we don't know if there are micronutrient deficiencies. Next. So we have in these children, we have half of them in Afghanistan under the age of 5 are vitamin A deficient, which we can, in this context, it's mostly whole foods that people purchase, not as much fortified like we have here to solve our nutritional problems. And a third of adolescent girls and 40% of women are anemic, which is often tied in with iron deficiency. A quarter of women are zinc deficient, and 95% of women are vitamin D deficient. So micronutrient deficiencies are an underlying or hidden form of malnutrition. Next. The reason we're particularly concerned about malnutrition is about half of child deaths are attributable to undernutrition because it affects your immunity and ability to combat infectious disease. It also affects growth and development and the ability of a country to progress. Next. So UNICEF in 1990 gave us a causal framework, which many researchers have modified over time. This is the one I used for my presentation, for my PhD research in Afghanistan. Under malnutrition at the top, we have diet and health status. So what you eat affects your nutritional status as well as your health status. If you have infectious disease, your ability to absorb nutrients or retain them can be affected. The agriculture sector contributes through agriculture production to household income and ability to acquire food or produce food for household consumption. And the health sector offers the health services to promote good health, also the sanitation and hygiene environment. So these are the leading sectors that I tend to collaborate with, but we also work with all sectors really when it's education, commerce, infrastructure. If you can't get to the health facilities or access credit to produce foods, those also affect your nutritional status. So nutrition is really a very interesting field because everything relates to it somehow through a framework like this. Next. So as I've mentioned on the map slide, that in Kabul, I worked with policymakers to look at what do we know about the deficiencies in the country and how can we address them. Leading interventions for iodine deficiency, which they had because it's a landlocked country and often iodine is found in seafoods, is to iodize the salt, which we've done in this country for a very long time. So that's something that UNICEF was supporting Afghanistan to do. But other issues that had less obvious solutions, we were looking for solutions at the community level. And so I did my anthropology of nutrition kind of work in the north of the country, meeting with communities to understand their nutritional capacities and gaps and how that could feed back into policy and programming. Next. So as an overview, I went into the villages. I first met with groups of men and leaders in the community to get permission to proceed. I worked with nonprofit organizations that were already active in this area. And to get permission to work there as a single American woman who people wondered, why isn't my father with me or where is my husband? So I had to navigate that working with local partners. And in the top right slide, we see how we had done a food listing. People shared about what they had available either through local production or the markets. And we looked at what do they have available year round. And we did that for all the different food groups. And then we met with the women to find out when are these foods prepared and used, at what age are they introduced to young children. Next. The results of our work fed into, there's a lot of quantitative data, but I didn't have time to share all of that today. But what we used the research to feed into was the policy and planning processes for what to prioritize it back in the capital. And there is a national network of nutrition officers that has been supported through international bilateral institutions, the World Bank, to build capacity around the country in all 34 provinces. So I worked with the new Afghanistan Institute of Nutrition, which I helped establish with our local partners, to do capacity building in the health sector on maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. So we worked on training for them. And then the UN Food and Agriculture Organization also worked with the Institute to explore future smart foods, which ties into this presentation on functional foods. What are the local highly nutritious foods we can promote to the population that address local deficiencies? And then food security and nutrition is related to the planning and strategizing component that the Institute helps advise. Next. So this slide ties us back into the United States. How can we use this multi-sectoral way of thinking to address the nutrition gaps in the United States? So here is our food guidance. Next. So in the dairy food group, in a household with food allergies and sensitivities, people acquire oat milk or soy milk or almond milk. The calcium present in that is not what it is in a regular milk. We also have coconut milk yogurt and these alternative Parmesan cheese, and Kraft has come out with not cheese, which tastes quite good on a grilled cheese. So if I'm trying to provide an American cuisine to my family, and our many households in our country are trying to just find the alternatives to continue to adapt, the nutritional value in these foods isn't necessarily comparable to what you would find in the original food. Next. In the grains category, there's some wonderful brands like Char and King Arthur that have wonderful non-gluten grain products that are quite tasty. There are many gluten-free products that don't taste good, and so it's really important for the taste testers to actually be people who have to eat them. But finding products that allow your family to proceed with a typical American diet, for me, requires going to 5 different grocery stores. So there's, if 10% of the US population is starting to eat in a modified way, not only the flavor, but the availability and the cost. The medical community is offering a diagnosis for these kinds of conditions, and you can use that with insurance to pay for the difference in cost. So that has been somewhat addressed, but the time burden is a bit of a factor. We haven't embarked on that ourselves yet. Next. I have the logos for some restaurants here, the And Pizza, Wendy's, and Chipotle. I have those here because as we look at grains and protein, the restaurants that we find that we eat at that I think are doing well are ones that allow you to pick your individual food ingredients more buffet style, cafeteria style, because that allows you to avoid the cross-contamination if people have food issues. So Chipotle, chopped salad. My daughter doesn't like salad, so I go there when I'm with adult friends. But the And Pizza is the only pizza place we can buy pizza at. They have a gluten-free crust and a dairy-free cheese option, but none of the other places that we've gone have been able to accommodate. One other issue with nuts that we found is the Costco nuts, which we like to shop at Costco, but they're all processed on equipment that also processes other allergens. And so we can't buy those. So we have to like go to the nut producers, like the pecan growers in Texas, and we try to order from there. And I think there's just a real need in our population for less cross-contaminated food. Next. In the vegetable section, we've been joining a local Lancaster Farm Fresh co-op to get our fresh fruits and vegetables. We don't really have issues with fruits and vegetables because we eat those as whole foods and we can have them separate. We cook with oil instead of butter. We buy a butter alternative that's a vegetable based. And with pesto, because it's often made with Parmesan, we have to look for a vegan pesto. So that I find at Whole Foods. Next. As I said, with fruit, there aren't many issues. Next. But the one issue is natural flavors. So that's something I was hoping that this group could help us with, because if it says natural flavors, I don't purchase it unless there's a real need for that product. And then I have to contact the producer of the food company because I need to know, are there pineapple components in this? So next and next. The food group that doesn't make the myplate.gov is desserts, but there are a lot of increasingly available allergen-free dessert options. The Enjoy Life brand is free of 14 allergens and they taste and cook great. In the dairy gluten side, we have Oreos, gluten-free Oreos to make s'mores. We have marshmallows and chocolate bars from the Enjoy Life brand, and the cakes from King Arthur, and the ice creams are generally sold in small quantities. And I know I need to wrap up. And but Breyers is starting to make a larger volume. So volume is another issue. And flavors beyond vanilla. Breyers isn't using gluten-free Oreos in their cookies and cream. So my daughter wrote them a letter and asked them to do that. Next. So the questions I have at the end are the same as the ones at the beginning, which we can return to in the Q&A. How can we work across sectors to address nutrition gaps in the US? And how can the scientists help us with that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily. It was a very fascinating presentation. The education of women on and the effect that has had on nutrition in Afghanistan is a really interesting topic. And it's an interesting contrast with nutritional issues in, for example, the United States. So now I'd like to hand this off to Sam Tharp. He's a master flavorist working and living in New York metropolitan area. Sam has a lot of experience in the food industry. So take it over, Sam.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is a big topic. And when we talk about flavor, is how do we get to the point of delicious and nutritious? We're sort of facing that puzzle of functional food, trying to understand what functional food is and how do we make it taste better. Trends that I'm seeing as far as project-wise are high protein, non-dairy products are really hitting the market hard. When you think of, you can walk through your grocery store and just learn a lot just by walking the aisles and seeing what the trends are. And then you can start to explore how well the food companies are doing in making a product that's not only nutritious for you, you feel good about it, it's delivering the high protein you're expecting, but also the flavor. And that's where the flavors come in. And I kind of jokingly say, flavor chemists make the world taste better. When you think about flavor chemistry and it's just exactly what is flavor and how did it start? And I always like to go back to that period of prohibition when they were looking for temperance drinks, those drinks that could be alternatives to alcohol, but also have some kind of quality of health benefit. So think of colas in particular. and the nuances of colas, and why were colas started in the pharmacies? Why were there soda jerks that were delivering flavor at the counter? And it was because the pharmacists had all of those essential oils and parts of flavor to put together, the spices, the herbs, to make that profile. Cola essentially is nutmeg, cinnamon, vanilla, some maybe a touch of orange, maybe even a touch of cardamom, nutmeg. So it's just a blend. And then why was the pharmacist concerned about flavor? Well, this is where medicine is, and essentially trying to mask the negative of whatever medication was being served. I think we all can remember tasting our cough syrup when we were young kids. Luden's cough drops. That cherry flavor is quite signature for Luden's. You taste or smell the cough syrups today, highly grape flavored. So it's all about delivering, a good taste while serving you health wise. And this is the challenge with high protein foods is they're all, a lot of them based on pea protein or oat. And the pea protein especially, it can be bitter, it can have sulfur components, and it really is the flavorist responsibility, I say responsibility, or challenge, and the puzzle to make these products taste well for the consumer. We work with food companies that they need to put out a product that the consumer is going to enjoy. And there's a lot of work that's done, project work with these food companies that are testing and retesting, reformulating. You've got food scientists working in the background to try to make these high protein products have the texture that the consumer will enjoy, as well as the flavor. And so there's ways to mask bitterness. There's ways to work with the base itself, choosing the right flavor. Is a lychee flavor, which is sort of light, delicate, and rosy, is it appropriate for a pea protein product? You can test it, and maybe it's going to be too delicate, whereas a vanilla flavor might be more appropriate in those bases. So, when we talk about functional food, it's, we go to the grocery store, we're just bombarded with information. And what exactly is functional food? And functional food can be milk with added vitamin D. It can be orange juice with calcium added. That's the function that is adding to it. Or it can be a food that is high in vitamin C. Your cranberry juices, your other supplements that you use, and we are can be reassured that the FDA, any food product that is claiming some kind of health claim has to prove that they've done the scientific studies to put that on their label. Whereas if a product says low sodium, low sugar, it just simply means that what that food company has done is taken that existing product and they've reduced the sodium, they've reduced the sugar. And we all can see the food trend as we walk through that supermarket is that the trend is lower salt, lower sugar. That's what the consumer wishes to have. And so it's just a very complex topic. There's a lot of things going on, and it's my belief that everyone should learn how to cook. If you learn how to cook, you learn how to understand the ingredients, you learn how to understand salt and sugar. And in inner city though, there's food deserts, and these food deserts, you have working parents or a single parent that just needs to feed their kids. So they might go to the most convenient place to them. And we know that that food can be high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt. So it really is, it's a multi-level solution that we need to figure out, is teaching parents about using spices and using flavor creatively, and also just learning how to assemble a meal together, because we all know that we are in a very fast-paced society, and sometimes we're just, there are people that are just trying to survive and trying to add some nutrition to their families' lives. So I can just say that, working in flavor, it really is multifaceted. I see a lot of product trends, and we see some go, some come. There's just a lot of variety out there, and walk through the store, stroll through the grocery store, and you'll become educated. And it really sort of keep your eyes open and look at new products. That's all I have to say, and I'll welcome your questions after everyone is finished presenting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. That was a very interesting overview of the work of flavorists in the food industry. So that's actually a very good segue into our next segment, which is going to be presented by Jesse Smith, who's the curator of a head curator at the Science History Institute, and he was also the curator of this exhibit, Lunchtime: The History of Science on the School Food Tray. And I'd like to add that this exhibit is on view through January 2026 at the Science History Institute. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Jesse.
Thank you, Keith. Yes, and I'm trained as a historian, so this will be more of a historical perspective, but I really appreciate Sam and Emily's contributions, because I think that the themes and questions that they've raised really intersect with the history that I'm going to talk about today. Concerns over flavor and taste and convenience. I really appreciated in Emily's presentation the attention to things like sociopolitical environment and household capacities and thinking about health and nutrition. And in the time I have today, I want to use this current exhibition to help orient us to the possibilities for historicizing the categories and the language we use when we're talking about food and nutrition and health. Here in the United States, nutrition science has always been a part of school feeding programs, though its place in those efforts has looked very different in different places and times. Today, I want to share some of the historical entanglements behind these programs to help us think about the ways in which varied interests, concerns, or goals shape our knowledge of the world and the ways we use it. So in the United States, school feeding programs begin in the 1890s, but the work behind them started much earlier. And in the exhibition, we actually start in the 1700s, when in Europe and the United States, we're seeing new scientific approaches to food, to diet, to health and nutrition. And there's a couple of motivations behind this new approach, this new way of understanding food and our bodies. There are military concerns. This is an image from a rare book in our collection explaining the earliest practices for large-scale canning. This is a technology of food preservation that had existed well before the 1790s, but not at a scale in which it could be deployed as a means of feeding military troops traveling long distances. The other trends were industrialization and urbanization, especially in the 1800s. You have lots of people moving, especially in excuse me, England and the United States, to growing cities. You have the emergence of larger and larger factories, and there's concerns over how these individuals are going to be fed, in large part to continue the economic practices, the economic imperatives that are behind such transformations in society. So you have research into the importance of variety in a diet. You have the development of new methods of analysis for input and output studies. You have the beginning of categorization of macronutrients, so things beginning to think about food in terms of carbohydrates and fats and proteins. New analytical techniques for understanding things like metabolism. You also have significant federal, here in the United States, federal investment in food science, especially in 1862 with the establishment of the USDA, an attempt to replicate a lot of the work that's happening in Europe, and supporting many American scientists who were trained in Europe. This also comes with the establishment of land-grant colleges here in the United States, which become important centers for agricultural and food science. Some of that work included that of William Atwater. This is an image of a human calorimeter in which subjects were performing activities like washing clothes or eating a meal in order to understand the energy needs of the body. And Atwater is credited with articulating and arguing for the calorie as the primary unit for understanding the energy value of food, something that's still with us today. In the interest of time, I might just move a little bit quickly through this. We also are looking at new attempts to understand the safety of food in this period as people are living farther and farther from the sources of their food. And there's also opportunities along those supply chains, but also among growing corporate suppliers of food for adulteration. A couple of social and political and cultural trends come together in the first school feeding programs in the 1890s. There's an increasing recognition of childhood as a distinct stage of life, that children have particular needs that differ from adults. Growing concern over the safety of children in factories, alongside the development of compulsory education laws that are requiring students to spend some part of their day in school. This begins in Massachusetts and then quickly spreads across the United States. And this is all tied to a trend that is sometimes called municipal housekeeping, largely driven by women's groups. It was an expansion of care beyond the home and out into the community, and involved, in addition to the start of school feeding programs, school lunch programs, the establishment of playgrounds, advocacy for clean air, for fresh water, the establishment of communal kitchens, and laundry for distributed labor. A lot of these early school food programs are led by a growing number of women trained as home economists, many at those same land-grant schools that were supported by the federal government. So you see the application of science to forms of care like cooking and cleaning. Early in the 20th century, our scientific knowledge of food continues to grow. There's the identification of micronutrients and the recognition of their value. We also begin to recognize diseases of nutritional deficiency. So we're not just concerned about people having enough food to eat, but concerned that they're eating the right things, so to speak. Some other technoscientific trends that intersect in the 20th century, new agricultural products like fertilizers and pesticides and new seeds that really increase agricultural output, such that by the time of the Great Depression, there are concerns of overproduction. And during the Great Depression, this actually leads the US government to begin buying agricultural surpluses. At first, it destroys those surpluses to protect farm prices, but after public outcry over that, it continues to buy surpluses, but then begins distributing them to schools and other institutions. The federal government's involvement continues through the Great Depression. The WPA becomes a major source of labor for school lunches, but also for the construction of cafeterias and kitchens. World War II really intensifies the involvement of the US government in these school feeding programs, concern over the health and readiness of troops, concern over the labor force here in the United States, and children who will be the next generation of workers and participants in military conflict. And this work includes support for scientific research, such as the establishment of RDAs in the 1940s. This is a photo of Lydia Roberts, a home economist who led the efforts to determine the minimum amounts of macro and micronutrients and calories that individuals needed in a day according to age, sex. That agricultural intensification continues over the course of the 20th century. And in 1946, when President Truman signs the National School Lunch Act, which formalizes the US government's involvement in this program, setting nutritional standards, providing actual food, and also providing reimbursement for school meals, it's very much envisioned as an agricultural program. It was and continues to be a part of the USDA. In large part, this was because of opposition from politicians, largely in the US South, who were concerned that this federal school lunch program was a means for the federal government to be involved in schools and potentially end desegregation, because the government had not been involved in this way. And as such, they insisted that the administration of school lunch programs remain under state and local control. There's also a large story of instrumentation here. This is an object from our collection, a gas chromatograph. This was an analytical technique that was significant in the commercialization of frozen foods in the 1950s. Again, through the support of the federal government, the technology for freezing food had existed for decades before this time, but it wasn't commercially successful until there were studies that improved the quality, the taste and smell of these foods, and that category of food quickly made its way not only into homes but into institutions like schools, but also hospitals, prisons, hotels, airplanes, and so on. Other work supported by the federal government included research into the dehydration of foods, and it led to the creation of things like potato flakes, which we otherwise might know as instant mashed potatoes. So I'll stop here, but hopefully that was an interesting overview of all the different intersecting interests, goals, concerns, forms of knowledge that have shaped school feeding programs here in the United States.
Thank you very much, Jesse. That was a really, really interesting overview. And for those who can make it to the Science History Institute in Philly, the lunchtime exhibit is reopening on March 19th and will be open until January 2026. And now we'd like to open up a Q&A session for the attendees. It turns out that you have to place your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom. Otherwise, we can't see it. I'm going to open with a question or two. Let's start with one for Sam. In your experience, if you can unmute yourself, please, Sam. In your experience, there's so many factors that goes into acceptance of a food product, of which very, very important ones are flavor, price, branding, association with a company or something like that. What do you think are some of the main determinants of success for driving good functional foods that will improve human nutrition into like more consumer acceptance?
Well, I think, especially when you think of the meatless products, for them to be able to be as close as possible to the real thing, for acceptance. Texture is very important, and that's across the board for any food product. But it also needs to taste delicious as well. And there's such a trend for true to fruit, true to profile. Vanilla comes to mind, cinnamon, spices of those tastes. And then you also have to be aware of the demographic. Who's going to enjoy and consume? And for success, you need to understand that demographic. Are you focusing on that one particular ethnic group? What is their flavor palette? And you need to understand that flavor palette in order for you to be successful. But the fun thing is that you can introduce that flavor palette to larger populations through creating food products.
Mhm. Okay, thanks. We have a question from Bill Tuzinski. What can we take away from Afghanistan? I think this is directed to Emily, to apply to the US and similar nations. And I'll add on to that, Emily, in your view, are you not surprised by the level of micronutrient led or diseases and deficiencies, even in developed countries like the United States? Do you find that surprising? And what can we take away from Afghanistan that we can teach the rest of the world?
Thanks for the question. I think in a place like Afghanistan, certain deficiencies are more understood. Like when I was first going there in 2005, vitamin C deficiency was a concern, and they were finding scurvy, especially in the very remote areas where they didn't have year-round access to fresh fruit or vegetables, and people weren't purchasing many processed foods. So they were encouraging supplements and airdropping vitamin C supplements, believe it or not, until markets improved to allow more availability. But I think here we do find a lot of people in this population taking supplements. And if we go to our physicians, annual physical, many of us are being encouraged to take vitamin D, vitamin E. We're not going out as much, just like the Afghan women, and getting a lot of direct sunlight. So a lot of us are being told we're low in vitamin D. And we're weighing, the cost benefits of risking skin cancer and getting natural vitamin D from the sunlight. So I think that's one that just is the way it is across cultures, because of the toying with, do we want to risk cancer or not? And the way we've been dealing with it here and in certain developing countries is fortifying dairy products with vitamin A and D. And fortification really has been the quick fix in a lot of places where people do acquire a lot of their food through the markets. We find even in places like Afghanistan that most people aren't subsistence consumers. Like they may grow some of their own food like wheat. So they never want to have a meal without bread, just like in many Asian countries, a meal isn't a meal without rice. In Afghanistan, you can't have a meal without bread. So people will grow a lot of their own wheat if they're in a rural area. But they may not have a lot of the other nutrients readily available to have that balanced diet year round. One of the things that I did was find out how can you preserve their different foods around the year. And one of the most interesting things was this is dairy preserved, and as it's hard, it's like rock, and it's something they would gnaw on. It's like preserved dairy. It's very salty. So they were coming up with creative ways to preserve foods around the year. But your question made me think of one other thing, but you might have to come back to me because I lost my train of thought there. But I think we need to think about, food preservation and availability throughout the year, and how we address that and promote it in ways that are socially acceptable.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up. That 7-year-old child who was a bit stunted, what deficiency was that due to, do you think?
Macronutrients largely, but also if they have a lot of micronutrient, vitamin, mineral deficiencies, then they lack the enzymes. Like zinc and iron are necessary for hundreds of different growth enzymes. So if you don't have the protein and the energy to grow or the enzymes to help with all the process of development and metabolism, then your growth trajectory is just going to be lower.
Yeah. I also wanted to point out one thing for the audience. As I understand it, functional foods can include the large range of healthy fruits and vegetables, the colored ones that we see or in the stores, or they can be fortified foods, as Emily and Sam have mentioned, like, for example, fortifying vitamin D into milk or things like that. So it can cover both classes. And in theory, functional foods are things that confer a health benefit beyond just the basic nutrition, and they differ from nutraceuticals, for example. So, question for Jesse. Have you seen, like, the calorimeter that you showed, that was used in food analysis for the benefit of school lunches? So as instrumentation moved along, you saw a social benefit that was able to help the kids?
Yes, I would say so. So instruments like the calorimeter were used both to understand health and nutritional needs of humans, but also animals. So a lot of the work was happening at agricultural centers, extension services. Atwater was the first head of extension services, and it really helped drive efforts to make sure that that young people were getting enough food, that they weren't going hungry. A lot of the social science research of the late 19th and early 20th century was perhaps unsurprisingly revealing pretty dramatic hunger across the United States, from cities to rural areas. So this scientific knowledge really did provide a strong foundation for the early school lunch programs, school feeding programs, which began primarily as volunteer efforts, but then quickly were taken up, as I said, by home economists. More recently, I think the debate, interestingly, has shifted a bit. You might have noticed that school lunches have been in the news over the past couple of years in ways we didn't expect when we chose this exhibition topic. But a lot of the public discourse is really about who pays for school lunches, questions of school lunch debt, and things like that. But perhaps more under the radar are debates over the nutritional standards in school lunches. The USDA just last spring released updated school lunch nutritional standards, which included things like reductions in sodium and added sugar, provisions for more whole grains. There's also been a lot of criticism, and I'll just say one more thing. There's also been a lot of criticism about the place of commercial foods, things like pizzas and packaged food like Lunchables in schools, which have been that's been allowed by the USDA since the 1970s, and there's critique that these aren't as even if they meet the nutritional standards, that they are instilling less than desirable eating habits among students. But there's also a lot of school lunch operators who defend those products, saying that they are what the students will eat, that when they're making from scratch foods, they often are thrown away. So if you're concerned about hunger, if you're concerned about empty bellies, sometimes it might be more advantageous to give the students what they want. And I think that ties to Sam's points about the concerns over flavor and taste. I mean, we can make very stringent nutritional standards for school lunches, but whether the students will eat them is another question.
Great point. Absolutely great point. Got some good questions in the Q&A. One is, Japanese kids have ID'd broccoli as their favorite food to a U.S. teacher who assumed they were lying. Are we too removed from embracing healthy foods via culture and media to embrace a healthy diet? Question mark. That's for the whole panel.
Well, I think, culture plays a big role. I work with a multicultural company, and we all like to celebrate what we enjoy eating. Broccoli in that case might be what they've grown up and gotten used to eating. Will Sally next door like to eat broccoli? Was she raised eating broccoli, or was she raised eating beets? It's really, the palate really is about what we've grown up with, but it's also in the food industry. It's we're aware of the demographic, and that's so important to understand who the audience is and how we're designing the flavors for that audience.
Yep. Go ahead, Emily.
I just wanted to share that East Asia is the only part of the world where people are actually meeting their 5-a-day requirement or recommendation for fresh fruits and vegetables. And my guess with that question is that it's so normal to have half of your plate, or at least 2 major portions at each meal, being fresh vegetables. And we know green vegetables are really rich and healthy and nutritious and recommended. But in our culture, especially in parts of the South, my kids were born in Texas, where fresh fruits and vegetables in certain communities are not very popular. So I think it's definitely, what's normalized in the culture. And I'd be curious to know, is broccoli something native to Asia, or is that seen like a special food, like mango is here? So, yeah.
You both of you point out the importance of cultural context to this whole thing. I have another question, one for Emily and another for Sam. The one for Emily is, in the US, we tend to think of flavor and function as two separate categories. This is the case both in regulations and culture and culturally. In other dietary cultures, like Ayurveda, for example, flavor has functional properties and, parentheses, to oversimplify a bit, close paren, is essential to the therapeutic effect of food and medicine. Can you speak more about cultural beliefs around flavor and what good flavor means in Afghanistan?
That's an interesting question. Flavor, I remember cardamom was one of their most dominant spices that was used. And when I came back, I thought I could live a number of years without tasting cardamom for a while. But I think it was very savory food there. And, in Italy, they have the slow food movement. They take time to cook. They take time to eat. I think in Afghanistan, it's the same way. Meals are long, lingering experiences. A lot of things are home cooked. So I think because most of the foods there are whole foods, I think people pride themselves on being able to be a good cook. In terms of functionality, I think when you eat foods that are fresh out of the orchard or fresh off the farm, everybody knows that that kind of food tastes just so much better. It hasn't been stored or preserved in a cooler for a long time. But otherwise, I hadn't focused on that. What I did learn a lot about while I was there is they have a native traditional system of hot and cold foods. That's not something we've thought a lot about here, but cold foods are ones that you avoid at certain times because of health issues, and hot foods are ones that you could take when you have like a respiratory infection. Cold foods you would take at other times of the year. And I think if we have some Indian people in the audience, they might be able to speak more to this as a traditional belief system. But I think it relates to the thermic effect of food, that that when you eat food, your metabolism kicks in and you create body heat. And there is a lot of ancient wisdom in the East about certain foods that you eat and what it does to your metabolism, and when that's good for your health and when it's not good for your health to eat certain foods. So they had this whole worldview about food and health that was new to me, that related to hot and cold. I think energy production of the food, not so much to flavor.
Yep. Then there's a question for Sam. It seems like foods and beverages want to make so many promises to us lately, exclamation point. And not only are sugar-free, free of any artificial ingredients, but also promote healthy metabolism, focused, calm, non-jittery energy, super immunity, no trophic mind-altering effects, things that go way beyond addressing nutrient or macronutrient deficiencies. What do you think is going on here? What role do flavorists and flavors play here in the effectiveness, parentheses, perceived or otherwise, closed paren, of these products?
Well, flavors is a small part of those claims. Food companies are trying to understand their consumer and trying to create a product that's going to be successful in the market. So they're developing these products. Ultimately, it's the consumer that makes the choice. I think we can I go to the grocery store again. We go in, and as consumers, we have choices to make, and we can pick these products. And essentially, our choices are voting, letting the food companies know what we're voting for. So if these products aren't moving, then food companies say, okay, this isn't what the consumer wants. Let's understand. And there's a lot of research done, consumer research, marketing research done to understand consumers. And I think we all know that as we scan our groceries, that data is being collected to see what's moving through those grocery stores. We buy a lot, we eat a lot, and there's a lot of data that's collected. And there's a lot of science behind what is in the grocery store and the choices we can make. So it really is the consumer that's making that. It's up to the consumer to make those decisions. If you don't care to buy those products, don't buy them. Otherwise, your curiosity will cause you to open up that case and see what it's all about. I'm going to drink this. Let's see if I can get the energy and not get jittery. Let's see if the claim is true.
Yeah, I agree. I, being from an industrial background, I know how much the customer drives the actual research. There's a question for Emily. Some children are picky eaters, yet would gladly eat vitamin gummies. Are supplements recommended for young children?
Well, I feed my children gummies because I'm not sure with all these alternative foods. I do buy normal foods for my son who doesn't have all these issues, but I do feed both of my children gummies. I think you have to make sure to brush your teeth because there's sugar in them and they're chewy and sticky. But in developing countries, I don't see a lot of widespread use of gummy vitamins, or there are some supplements, especially drops for young infants, like iron is often given to young children in supplement form. And I was going to toss out, there's a real need for zinc fortification. So for those working in the fortification sector, we have done a lot of iron and B vitamin fortification of our grain supply, but we haven't done zinc fortification, and there is a widespread issue with that. So there's a real need there worldwide.
Yeah, I agree. I really apologize that we can't, we had to leave one question left. We're just about out of time. The zinc is a good point. It's a cofactor in so many important enzymes. It's really important to make sure there's enough zinc in everybody's diets. I did want to reemphasize something that Emily brought up. Go to myplate.gov for all the attendees for the current USDA guidance on nutrition. It sort of replaces the food pyramid, and that's a really good place to get guidance on good nutrition. Finally, I also wanted to say, as far as I can see, the functional food market is really growing. It's somewhere in the nature of 340 billion worldwide, and maybe about 100 billion in the US, with a 6.5% compound annual growth rate as of 2024. So it's an important market depending on what you include in functional foods or not. So with that, I think we would like to close things up, and we have a few things we'd like to say as on behalf of the Science History Institute. Please help us make more free programs for our 2.7 million scientifically curious people possible. Please think about making a gift to the Science History Institute. Indeed, I myself am a donor, both time and money, and I think it's a very worthwhile cause. Next slide. In addition, you can connect with past JPS talks. Just go to this site, sciencehistory.org/JPS videos. It's also on YouTube. And one other slide, I believe. And then finally, we are going to have the last JPS lecture of the 2024-25 season. That's on April 10th at 1 p.m. And it's on CRISPR-Cas9, which, as most of you know, is the dominant method of genome editing right now, starring Dr. Jennifer Don. And we hope you can pull in and make it. And with that, I think that comes to the conclusion of our program. We thank you all for joining us, and I think it's been a very fruitful and interesting discussion. So thank you all.